Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this very unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy award-winning wines. So why serial killer and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's actually captured a serial killer. Yes, so this is real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, well, she joins me, and together we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Well, we're enjoying our favorite Casaro wines. Now, I've got my favorite Casaro wine today. It's our crime scene, but we'll talk about that a little later. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. Now, on this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Genene Jones, a serial killer who played God with the most innocent of victims, babies. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a case that drew huge amounts of attention here in Texas and really all around the country, not just because of the innocence of the victims, but the stonewalling of the hospitals that were involved and the snafu in Texas law, which would have resulted in early release from prison if it had not been for some prosecutors who filed additional charges to keep her behind bars. I mean, what do you think of a woman, a nurse, that kills babies?
Well, John, I think that people like this who commit their crimes in local, familiar places, I think her just right under her nose, the baby she's supposed to be caring for, and she's murdering them or harming them. We're going to talk about Munchausen syndrome a little bit. And John, not only is this case common, but this happens all over our country. There have been cases even recently of nurses and doctors playing God, like you said. So very interesting case as always. And we're going to get into some of those early tendency and warning signs. Okay, John. So today we are talking about Genene Ann Jones. Like you mentioned at the beginning, this is a nurse who was playing God with children and infants inside of the hospital that she was working at. And again, we're going to be talking about how sometimes hospitals, not only just hospitals, but other institutions want to cover things that have happened within the organization. But this was a big deal here in Texas, a big case. Genene Jones, born July 13th, 1950. They nicknamed her, John, the Angel of Death. She was actually a licensed nurse here in Texas who murdered or harmed dozens of infants and children. Estimated to be between maybe 11 to 60 plus, John, but maybe even more than that between 1977 and 1982. She's convicted early in 84. There was some discrepancies within some of the investigation. There were charges put against her back again in 2020 because she was actually going to be released, and then started confessing to some of these crimes in 2020. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But contrast with Bundy style killers, Jones killed from within the most trusting setting, a pediatric care unit, John, of a hospital.
Yeah, I mean, Bundy was out there, stalking victims, killing women, breaking into sorority houses, luring women, posing like he was injured, but it was adult on adult. Here, you've got a woman that was preying on the most helpless members of our society. And usually, we say that when we refer to children. We're not even talking children. We're talking babies, infants that had no say whatsoever in what was happening to them, and she decided if they would live or they would die.
And you have to wonder, there has to be a different state of mind for that, John. I want to ask a little bit about that later when we start getting into this profiling piece of this, but there has to be something else there. And to be able to prey on the most innocent, and as a woman, which is very unusual too. So we'll talk about that a little later. But in her early years, she is born in Texas in July 1950. She was actually adopted by Richard Jefferson, Dick Jones, and his wife Gladys. She grew up in the San Antonio area and attended John Marshall High School in San Antonio. She worked in the library. I mean, so far, parents going to school. Jones showed some early signs, though, of emotional and psychological problems, despite having a good relationship, with her parents. She was known, and this is very interesting when I was reading about this, John, fabricating illnesses and displaying troubling behaviors, including manipulative rhetoric to seek attention through the suffering of others. So what are you picking up there in those early years?
Yeah, so I mean, that's very, very unusual, right?
Yes.
We see this disorder that she has starting to manifest itself as a child, as a young girl. She fakes being sick to get attention. Well, some kids do that. That happens sometimes. But when a pattern develops that she's fabricating, these illnesses, that she's got these troubling behaviors that seem to always want the spotlight to be on her. We already see the development of that narcissistic personality. And there seems to be almost no end to what she would do to get the attention, not just from her parents, but from teachers, from people that knew her. So from the very early stages, she really doesn't check a whole lot of boxes here, except this psychological disorder that starts manifesting itself at a very early age. And unfortunately, we're going to see it develop and develop and develop and end up with the murder of babies.
I do have a question about that. I'm going to ask it in a little bit, about the psychological. I am curious on Munchausen syndrome, and I know we're going to talk about this a little later, of whether that is an actual identified psychological behavior that is diagnosed that someone has to be treated for, or is there attention seeking and this is just a way in order to seek that attention, or if there is an actual psychological issue here.
Yeah, no, there's an actual psychological issue and a disorder. And I think as anything else on the spectrum, it ranges, right?
Right.
And she obviously took it to the most extreme. And we're going to see that. Now, she did have, in addition to, people kind of noticing, wow, why is she making this stuff up? Why is she calling attention to herself? Is she really that sick? That type thing. They noticed, or she did have a couple of triggering events in her life. As a young girl in her teens, she did enjoy spending time with her dad and actually helped him painting billboards and doing advertisements around Bexar County for his business and everything. But shortly before her 18th birthday, she lost not one, but two brothers. And one died of an improvised explosive device that he actually built and blew himself up. So that is a huge trigger, the loss of not just one, but two brothers. But to make it worse, in the same year, her dad died. Now, so we got to take all of this together. She spent a lot of time with her dad. She loved her dad. We have the death of two brothers, but then the death of her dad. He was only 56 at the time of his death. So we talk about these precipitating stressors. We talk about these triggers. We've seen it in other serial killer cases, right? We've seen these tragic, traumatic events happen, and then it seems to set off another series of events. Now, you can't, and again, I'm not trying to blame it on these events, because she was exhibiting these signs of behavior prior to these
Mm-hmm.
events, but they could certainly magnify
Mm-hmm.
what she was going through. And I think that's exactly what you saw happen here.
Yeah, and I also think of having to try to get that attention while they're alive, and now that they're not, that attention has to come from somewhere else.
Right.
So you have to then find other outlets in order to receive that. So like you said, there's going to be some psychological seeds that have been planted. There were those early signs of fictitious disorder, the Munchausen tendencies that we talked about, and a hero complex. There was also, again, Munchausen syndrome is a mental health condition where individuals intentionally fake, exaggerate, or induce physical or psychological illness in themselves to gain attention, sympathy, or assume the sick role. We
Right.
also hear about this in parents doing this to their own kids, John, right? Convincing them at a young age that there's something wrong with them growing up thinking they have an illness, and then to find out later they actually don't.
And that's more Munchausen by proxy. So
Yes.
you've got both of these that are going on here, creating a fictitious disorder about yourself and feigning, the illness to get sympathy or attention. Again, goes back to what we saw, the early signs of her behavior, the narcissistic condition, even to the point of causing self-harm. Right? They won't stop at just making it up. They may cause self-harm. They may tamper with medical tests. They may go from doctor to doctor to doctor. You call it doctor shopping. Oh, look at me. Something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me, to get attention. And then you have the Munchausen by proxy, where they're projecting it usually on their children, innocent victims, and they may even do things to hurt them to get attention and to be the one that swoops in and helps them. My baby was sick and I figured it out and I helped them, or I saved their life. Either way, they thrive on medical emergencies. And so you can see this in her behavior as a young adult, and then certainly it explodes as an adult.
Well, like you mentioned, there's self-harm, there's fabrication of illness, they are doctors shopping everywhere, extensive medical knowledge. They have to go to different doctors because one doctor doesn't find anything wrong with them,
Right.
then they'll go to another one. They're inconsistent in these stories. Maybe doctors ask questions. When did you start feeling like this? How long have you had this? And so, and I don't even know if they actually give all this information that they're supposed to be giving, right? Maybe they hold a lot of this information back because they truly know there's really, nothing wrong.
Some
John,
of them may even contaminate their tests, Brandy, like
Wow.
contaminate urine samples so that something shows
Oh my gosh.
abnormal, and the doctor keeps examining them or looking at them. But I think another fascinating aspect of this, as they're doing it,
Mhm.
they're gaining a tremendous amount of medical knowledge. Many of them also research it. And so their knowledge base and information about the medical field really increases as they're posing these fictitious scenarios on themselves or their children.
So, John, do you think they all think something is wrong with them? Or do they know there's
it's
nothing
fictitious.
wrong with
They
them?
know there's nothing wrong with them.
They do know.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, this is a fictitious, right?
Yeah.
Behavior,
Okay.
and what they're
Wow.
doing it for is attention, right? And now take it. You've got children, and if you
Sure.
come in one day and your child goes, "I hit my thumb," and you go, "Oh, poor baby, let me kiss it, it'll be better," right?
Mm-hmm.
Now she comes in and says, "Oh, I hurt my hand, and you kiss it and you show her attention and everything else. This is that kind of concept on steroids. No one's
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to me. I want someone to pay attention to me, even to the point that I would hurt myself, that I would contaminate samples, that I would change test results because I want someone to pay attention to me. No one's paying attention to me. So, was
Yeah.
that triggering event of losing her dad and her two brothers, and now all of a sudden she's really adrift and lost and aimless because no one's paying attention? This is really narcissistic behavior at its
Yeah.
apex.
Wow. So, like you said, the motivation and causes a lot of this, the psychological needs, childhood trauma. The only trauma I really saw was the death of the brothers and the dad, and maybe she needed
Right.
to compensate for not having them there anymore. Those personality factors, the self-harm, again, those underlying really personality disorders, not really liking yourself, maybe low self-esteem. And then of course you mentioned, them now inflicting that on their own children, thinking that, something is wrong with the child. But John, just like a lot of these, she ends up married. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you mentioned low self-esteem, and a lot of
Yeah.
times folks with low self-esteem try to overcompensate, right?
Yep.
They try to do something, study something. A lot of times at a dinner party, the ones that talk the most are the ones that have the lowest self-esteem because they want attention given to themselves because they really don't have anything to talk about, you know?
Yeah.
And I've seen that multiple times. So you start tying the low self-esteem with the narcissism, with the need for extreme attention,
Hmm.
and this is all kind of building up here.
Yeah. Well, like a lot of serial killers we talk about, maybe at this point we don't really see any significant signs except she's doing this to herself at this point. But she gets married. She marries her high school sweetheart after graduation. She actually went to beauty school and then worked at an actual, beauty salon. Her husband was drafted and they ended up moving to Georgia. They had a son, but in 1972, they filed for divorce, but then reconciled. And in 1976, filed for divorce again. Then they actually ended up having a second child, John, in 76. Is that right?
Yeah, the divorce was granted, but apparently during the hearings,
Mm-hmm.
she had what she referred to as a hiatus with the man
Mm,
she was divorcing, and that they ended up with two children, basically. But
okay.
they did end up divorced in 76. So,
Okay.
now we've got, these behaviors. When we start looking at the background and I start checking the boxes, substance abuse, we don't see that. Abusive parents, we don't see that. Matter of fact, what we see is probably loving parents and especially a loving father. Mental health issues, yeah, we're going to check that box, right? Because parents, others recognized that Munchausen type behavior, even at a low level, early on. And that need for attention and that need for, hey, I need to be the center of the universe. So the mental health issues, certainly we're going to check that box. Traumatic brain injury, no indication of that at all. Physical characteristics, nothing telling. She wasn't beautiful. She wasn't not beautiful. Intelligence, she did well in school. We're going to find out not only does she do well in nursing school, she actually scores very, very high. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we'd be average to above average in intelligence. Certainly her social skills, though, we're going to see this. It's obviously going to manifest itself, but narcissistic personality and little empathy for others. We don't
Okay.
know anything about animal abuse or pornography, and we really don't see any crimes, but another trigger might have been one, the marriage and then the move to Georgia took her away from her roots, away from her family, kind of left her alone over there, and then the divorce, right?
Yeah.
So we do have a couple of these boxes that we're checking, but nothing compared to, serial killers that you and I have discussed on previous shows.
Yeah. You mentioned her passing grade on that nursing exam, John. She scored 200 points above the passing grade.
Oh yeah.
Um, I mean, just maybe I don't know about her school grades, but she probably she knew what she was doing on that nursing exam.
And remember, she had been picking up medical knowledge, right?
That's right.
She had been feigning illnesses and learning and studying. So, someone that's halfway intelligent, they're studying on their own, they're learning, gaining information, almost playing the system at this point. I think you can certainly say that. And it paid off in nursing school and in her final exams.
So even though she did pass with a very high grade, there were some stumbles very early on in her career. In mid 1977, this is when she ends up moving into her mom's home to pursue that nursing career. After she passes, she ends up taking a job later that year as a nurse at the Methodist Hospital. But John, she's asked to resign after having a conflict with a doctor.
Yeah, and I thought that was very interesting. You have a young woman who
Uh-huh.
just got her LVN, so we're not even talking about an RN or PA or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking into it. I'm like, what kind of conflict can you have with your doctor? She actually was questioning the doctors on their diagnosis and their dosages. And this is going to come back up again. So she, as an LVN, was questioning a medical doctor, and she ended up resigning. You're not going to win that battle, right?
Yeah, yeah. Especially as your first year as a nurse.
Yeah,
I mean, she is
yeah.
fresh out of school.
Yep.
Okay, well, she ends up taking a second job after having the conflict with the doctor, and she starts working at South Texas Medical Center. Now, she joins the obstetric unit, John, where, the obstetricians, they have the babies, but after 3 months resigned to have minor surgery. Do we know what kind of surgery she had?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't find out what kind of surgery it was. But again, is this one of those large precursors, her final attempt at calling attention to herself, right? Is this, it was it said a minor surgery. It didn't seem like a big deal at all. You could have taken days off, sick days.
Yeah.
But she resigned. So is now she feeling, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this, or I have these feelings like I want to hurt people. Yeah, there is this huge internal conflict, I think, going on at this time about what she's feeling about herself, about nursing, about people paying attention to her. So really, really weird period of time. But then in 78, she's hired by Bexar County Hospital, where she works with critically ill newborns and babies. So she threw herself back into the fire of not just a hospital, right? Because there's a ton of places you can work in hospitals, a lot of different divisions, but that's where she went to work. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro Winery brands. And today I'm enjoying our crime scene. Yes, the bottle right behind me, the crime scene tape. Yes, the one that won a gold medal just for the label. But it's filled with a dry red wine, a Teraldigo. And this wine won double gold out of 3,200 wineries, 24 countries. It's a garnet colored grape with earthy notes and flavors like blackberry, cherry, and plums. This medium-bodied fruit, usually low tannins, and it pairs great with spaghetti carbonara or, any pasta dish. But with the spaghetti carbonara, it really complements the peppery notes and the bacon or pancetta flavor in that dish. So try a glass of our Giraldago, our crime scene wine. You can order all of our wines from CasaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com, and join Brandy and I as we drink wine and talk true crime.
Okay, so we talked about her going into that Bexar County Hospital, working in that pediatric ICU. You know, she becomes an LVN in 1977. So when she goes to Bexar County Hospital into that pediatric ICU, John, between 1978 and 1981, she was on that 3 to 11 p.m. shift. John, there were so many babies dying during that time, they called it and nicknamed it the death shift.
Yeah, isn't that horrible that the other
Horrible.
nurses nicknamed it, and until they started an investigation much later, no, that was kind of a name that they gave that shift. That's absolutely horrible.
Horrible. And these are some of the sickest infants that they have in this hospital. Now the Bexar County Hospital PICU, in San Antonio was an 8-bed unit for critically ill infants. Over 15 months between April of 1981 and June of 1982, John, 42 children died in the PICU, 34 on Jones's 3 to 11 p.m. shift.
Right. Those are staggering numbers.
I mean,
42 children. Okay, 42 children, and they're critically ill. We know that.
Mhm.
There's going to be a high mortality rate, but 34 on her shift. That's why the other nurses called it the death shift.
So she actually later moved to the Kerrville Pediatric Clinic in 1982. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I look at this timeline. April of 81 to June of 82, 34 deaths on her shift at Bexar County. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, and then they continued in Kerrville at the pediatric unit.
So I know we're going to start talking about some of these victims, John, and like you and I spoke about earlier, we don't even have an exact number. I think we said between 1160 plus. But we've got the MO, the victimology. We're gonna talk more about those victims. But what are you picking up from a profiling perspective?
Yeah, even when she ended up confessing at the end of all this, it still was an undetermined number of babies.
Unbelievable.
That's horrifying. Well, we do know that she was injecting them with a number of different drugs at different times. Some of them were muscle relaxants that would paralyze them. Some of them were blood thinners that would cause additional bleeding. Some of them caused overdoses. Others caused seizures. So we do know how she was doing it. Some went into respiratory arrest, and in some cases, she would try to save them. And actually did. That's that playing God, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to kill him so I can save him and be the hero and get praise. Can you imagine doing that? I mean, I can't even imagine doing that to a person, but an infant, that you would put them in a precarious position where they could die so that people would heap praise on you. She often told other nurses that I don't think this baby's going to make it. And then the baby would die. On some of the children, she had overwhelming, abnormal emotional reactions. Okay. She would grab the dead baby and sob and cry as if the baby was her own, to the point where on a couple occasions, other staff had to take the baby away from her to bring it to the morgue, and was possessive over their bodies. So we see a very distinct MO that continued and continued and continued. Now, as far as victimology, other than baby, there wasn't a bias by race or gender or even level of illness. There were some kids that went in there with fairly minor conditions or had fairly minor surgery, certainly that the doctors said their level of expectation of full recovery was very high. So from victimology, we're really looking at a baby, and if she determined in her head that this baby should die, then she usually took measures to make sure they did.
Mm. Okay.
Very, very troubling. Very troubling.
I mean, and then to predict the death, knowing she's going to cause it, and then to hold the babies to the point where nurses have to like take the corpse babies from her. I mean, and it's all fake, and it's just
Yeah, and she's doing this
terrible.
knowingly, intentionally, willingly.
Yeah.
I mean, she is taking other people's children and killing them. And sometimes, Brandy, right in front of the mothers.
All right, John. Well, let's get into well, I don't want to necessarily say the first victim. Do we know this is actual first victim?
No, we don't. And
Okay.
and yeah, so we're not gonna put these in any kind of I tried putting them in a chronological order, best we know, but when it came to her sentencing, and so we got to be careful about this, she was sentenced on very specific cases. She did confess to some, but let's just say these were very suspicious circumstances on her watch.
Okay. All right. Well, we have Christopher Hogetta, 15 months old. Christopher had been hospitalized for about 6 months with heart problems. He died May 21st, 1981 from cardiac arrest. Jones had this overly emotional reaction to crying and holding the deceased baby and saying he was her boy. So, again, you have a child dying from cardiac arrest at 15 months old.
Yeah, and I kind of go back to Arsenic Annie, right? Remember when we did the show on Arsenic Annie? She knew what to give her victims, so it mimicked normal causes of death. Now, she had no medical training whatsoever, but she figured out what levels of arsenic or what types of poison to give them to mimic causes of death, and that's why she got away with it for years. So you see how hard it is for someone that has some knowledge and has some training. She could inject the baby, and the baby would die from cardiac arrest. Well, it was there for heart problems anyway, so no one thought anything of it. So that's how these crimes went on for such a long period of time without people raising this red flag. The baby's in there for heart problems. He dies of heart problems, right?
Right.
And we, like I said, we saw that with Arsenic Annie over and over. She would go with these guys that had stomach problems, liver problems, heart problems, and they would die of it. So the doctor didn't think anything of it.
Well, then, before we get into the next victim, I do want to talk about her behaviors, or just her attitude towards her colleagues, towards other doctors. So this is where I start to see some of the narcissism, John, like challenging the doctors on their dosages, known among doctors as being a pain in the ass, basically, to deal with. She's condescending towards her colleagues. I see a know-it-all, right? I see someone who is this to me is where I'm starting to see some of that narcissism.
Right. Look at me. Look what I know. You're stupid. You don't know. She would confront doctors about dosages. Well, when you get a reputation among the doctors like this, nobody wants to work with you. And again, she just wanted that spotlight shined on her.
Yeah.
She was
All right.
smarter than everybody else.
Um, and I, again, with that narcissistic behavior of, that's why to me, gosh, there were so many victims. I don't know, John. I hope there were some really early red flags that maybe people just ignored. Because you have a woman who acts like that, behaves like that, is picked up with that behavior by her colleagues. Then you have all these children dying on her shift. Gosh, maybe hindsight 2020 of them looking back and thinking that maybe they should have known something was a little wrong with
I think you're
this.
exactly right, Brandy. You're exactly right. In hindsight, with a lot of these killers,
Sure.
we can put the information together and go, oh my gosh, why didn't they see that? But you're
Yeah.
talking about a critical care unit
I know.
where some percentage will die. And then if you can mass the deaths where they fit the illnesses of the children,
Yeah, I know.
that'd be almost impossible.
Well, that's what happened with Rosemary Vega, Latina female, 2 years old. This was in September of 1981, and she was in the Bexar County PICU. Now, she was there for post-heart surgery. She was doing well after the surgery. They did have her on a respirator. The PICU bed while the mother sat nearby was the actual crime scene. So the mom is there,
Yep.
which, they open that up to the parents to be able to come in to sit with their babies. Now, Jones enters, injects an unknown substance into the IV, and told the mom it was to help her rest. The child turns purple. She starts to code. They call in the troops and died 2 nights. Basically after this happens,
Right.
all on Jones's watch. The mother witnesses the injection. Again, that power trip, John, the doing this in front of the mother. Not only can I get away with this when you're not here, I can get away with it when you are here.
Exactly.
Just ill. Ugh.
Exactly. You're exactly right. This is another step, right?
Yep.
This is a serial killer taking it to another level, a serial killer evolving. Not only can I kill these kids, I can kill them right in front of their mother. Absolutely horrific. I don't know what else to say.
I mean, there's really nothing to say about to be able to come into the most sensitive of humans and to give your time. I mean, nobody wants to believe a PICU and NICU nurse is going to do this to babies. I mean,
Right.
I think that in general, John, just the thought of people dedicating their time to help sick children, sick babies get better. I mean, nobody wants to believe this actually happens.
Oh, I can tell you when my daughter was sick and we took her to Children's, and I saw the care and the love and the attention of the nurses, the doctors that got her well from a very strange, debilitating illness. I mean, I would have given them anything. I would have written them any check. I would have given them anything in the world. They saved my baby. And now you have someone who's killing the babies.
So in 1981, though, they are going to do a hospital investigation. So the hospital noted an unusual death rate at the PICU. Finally,
yeah, this is the fall of 81, by the way. So this is the fall. They started looking at the numbers that you mentioned earlier and went, uh-oh, something's up.
So there were actually people who believed that she was harming the babies during that shift because, like we said earlier, the other nurses referred to her shift as the death shift. But they did an investigation and it proved inconclusive, even though 10 babies at that time had died on her watch.
Yep.
I mean, we're talking 10 at that time.
I gotta think the investigation is not like one that I would have done, right? I don't know how thorough it was. I don't know who conducted it. I don't know if, and we do know now, the hospital was afraid of lawsuits, was afraid of getting in trouble. Up until the very end, that was their line. So we don't know how thorough any of this was. We don't know if they could pin it on her. Maybe they couldn't, right? Maybe they honestly said, it's a coincidence. Again, I keep going back to, this is a horrible situation. You have a critical care unit where children do die.
That's right.
And when you combine that, even when they have a spike, is that a abnormal spike? Is it a spike because of something else? I don't know, but there was some belief by some staff that Jones was involved, and yet the investigation was inconclusive. So this is fall, right? That we have the investigation. Things are still happening. Jones is still working because the hospital was not able to prove it in whatever manner, right?
Right.
And now we're up to October, so we're still in the fall, and we got more children dying.
That's right. We've got 6-month-old Jose Antonio Flores dies after suffering an uncontrollable bleeding, but no autopsy was conducted on Flores's body. The handwritten record from the day of the boy's death highlighted that Genene Jones was present during the emergency. And John, I thought about this autopsy because not all, when babies are in the PICU and NICU, there are some parents who will have an autopsy and some parents who will not.
Right.
And sometimes I think that it, with a newborn, I think that's a different maybe choice in a parent than it is if your, teen son or your son in their 20s was to die, well, what happened to them if they just die all of a sudden? But I think there is some sort of level of acceptance when your child is sick that you believe them. And you don't feel there's a need for an autopsy. And frankly, I don't know if some parents even want to go through that after just having to deal with that kind of trauma of losing a child. So I did think about this autopsy piece, John.
Yeah, you're trusting the doctors, trusting the nurses, trusting the hospital. Your baby's there for a reason, right?
Yep.
And if they do pass away, I can certainly see that.
Yeah. There was another one on December 22nd, 1981, John. We have Doralia Rios, a 25-month-old little girl, died soon after Jones took up the PICU shift. So the girl is there. She comes on her shift. The baby was recovering from GI surgery when she abruptly decompensated. On the day of the girl's death, Jones left a note on the nursing book addressing her condition directly, addressing her directly, and wishing her a Merry Christmas. What?
Yeah.
Like,
that was very disturbing to me.
What?
She not only knew what she was going to do 3 days before Christmas, but in the nursing book specifically wished her a Merry Christmas. There's not a whole lot I can say about this lady. I have, looked at and been involved with serial killers for a very long time, but this level of non-remorse and non-empathy and narcissistic behavior brings this to a level that I think is rare, even among the worst of the worst out there. But we're not through December yet.
No. December 1981, Joshua Sawyer, 11 months old, again in the PICU. The infant was treated for smoke inhalation and was stable and recovering from that.
Yep.
But again, it happened, his death in the PICU room on Jones's shift. Now, he was injected with an overdose of Dilaudid, which is an anti-seizure medication, triggering seizures, cardiac arrest, and death. Witnessed the injection by the staff, so she gives it to him. Staff sees her give it to him. Jones later confesses to this in 2020 during her plea deal, but it also shows escalation, targeting even recovering patients. They're getting better,
right?
But you send them the other direction.
Yeah, because sometimes we hear these angels of death go, they were going to die anyway. I was putting them out of their misery. I was trying to be merciful. That's not the case here. That is not the case at all. She
No.
is intentionally killing these babies, even babies that would have had a full recovery. And later on, I think some of the doctors that testified and the investigation that they conducted showed that was a routine surgery. Yes, the child needed to be in the critical care unit, but the child was going to recover.
Right.
The child was going to make it through the surgery. The child was going to be okay if it wasn't for her. So now that brings us into January. I think when she wrote in the nursing book about Christmas,
Yep.
I think it showed us that she really thought there's no way that she was going to get caught and she could do this forever. Well, unfortunately, we're going to see that she just moves after a little bit, but continues it. Because in January of 82, Rolando Santos was one of her victims. He was a premature infant recovering there in the PICU. He was injected with a massive overdose of blood thinner, causing internal bleeding and a near fatal crisis. She was the only one present. Now, he did survive, but suffered permanent damage. And this is going to come back. We've seen this with other cases. The survivors will come back, and that's how we will get convictions. He did survive, and she eventually will receive a conviction for what she tried doing, what she tried doing, which was making him overdose and killing him.
Well, it doesn't stop. And in January of 1982, we have 4-month-old Patrick Zavala dying unexpectedly following a successful operation on a pulmonary artery. Again, John, these successful surgeries, doctors going, they should have survived. There's no reason of them to have died from this or after this surgery. But after Zavala's death, medical personnel became angry about the number of infants that had unexpectedly died. Surgeons were particularly, worried and upset at the sudden, babies that, they're patients. And now they've given them successful operations, and now something is going wrong with them. And so I can only imagine a surgeon going, what did I do? What was happening? They kind of put it back on themselves, but the nurses were upset, and 3 of them, basically saying that, they wanted to see the autopsy. They wanted Zavala to have an autopsy and say, what's going on? How did this successful surgery kill this 4-month-old?
Yeah, and I think it was the surgeon that drove it, right? Because they're going, we're doing these surgeries. They're successful.
You have to be able,
there's nothing we're doing wrong. They're
thinking
about malpractice suits and lawsuits and all that. But they're also, it's people going, I didn't make a mistake. That child should have had a full recovery, and it was Zavala's death that triggered another investigation, starting with the autopsy. So again, going back to like Arsenic Annie, it was the doctor in the hospital that said, wait a minute, why did this guy die? I want to do an autopsy. And he found the arsenic in his system and then called back, to where she lived and started all of that. So here again, we have doctors going, there's no reason these babies need to be dying. I want an autopsy. I want to look at it. And the other nurses on the shift stayed. They stayed later just to see the results of the autopsy. So after that, we had a couple of surgeons convene an urgent meeting with the hospital administrators and officials. And they started locking away supplies of some of the drugs that they thought Genene was using. And a medical committee agreed that Genene was the main target. But again, they were divided on whether to fire her. So instead of firing somebody who could possibly be killing children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not sticking up for the hospital here. The committee decides to put her under stricter controls. So they're controlling the medicine she has access to.
Yep.
And yet some of them really believe that she's got something to do with this. Well, finally, this goes on to March 82, and the hospital says, we have to do something. So instead of another investigation, a criminal investigation, charges, whatever, they decide, well, we don't want to get sued if we fire Genene. So we're going to change the nurses on the entire PQ. And we're going to get rid of all the LVNs and we're going to replace them with RNs.
Okay.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh.
Okay.
You know, I'm sorry, but this is looking really dirty on the
Yep.
part of the hospital. The decision not to fire her was because administrators feared that civil lawsuits would be raised against the hospital. Now, we get feedback every single week on our social media channels, folks DMing us and sending us emails. You can email us at truecrime@casarovines.com. If you have a winery near you that would like to host our live show, yes, we do the live show all across the country. We feature unique and interesting serial killer cases, and the audience gets to profile along with us. So drop us an email, truecrime@casarovines.com. If you've got a winery or a wine bar that wants to host a True Crime and Wine near you, and as always, follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, JJ True Crime and Wine, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and we'll talk to you soon.
You know, John, you were just talking about, possible really the hospital investigation into this. They know she's probably, some of them probably feel she's responsible of this. Some of them probably are a little unsure. They're worrying about civil lawsuits coming from her because what if they are, what if they wrongly accuse her of this? But then you have parents and you have this unexplained number of child deaths, infant deaths going on her watch, and it's politics, right? We go back to cover up. It's not just hospitals that do that. It's all kinds of businesses that do this. And so they're trying to cover themselves and they're trying to, put more restrictions on her. But John, we know that this isn't enough because eventually she goes and works for another doctor.
Yeah. And so, she is given a choice to go to a different part of the hospital because they got rid of all the LVNs, replaced them with RNs, and she simply resigns and goes on and she does some work with a nursing agency, but ultimately lands with another doctor in a pediatric clinic and continues her killing. I mean, she is highly organized, highly planned, and she's narcissistic. She has this hero complex where she brings some back and she lets others die. But Kathleen Holland doesn't know that. Kathleen Holland is the doctor that hires her to work in her practice. Now, I will say we did hear that other doctors warned her and said, are you sure you want to hire Genene? And are you sure that you've done a full background check on her? And I guess without knowing it, we find out later Genene never renewed her license during this time. But in August of 82, so it went from spring until August, she worked at some nursing agencies, and in August of 82 started to work with Dr. Holland.
Well, it didn't take long after that because September 17th, 1982, she strikes again. Chelsea McLeland, 15 months old. This was a healthy toddler that was brought in for routine checkup by her mother with no prior critical illness. Dr. Kathleen's clinical room, exam room was the actual crime scene, and Jones gave injections while her mother had stepped out of the room, John.
Yep. Yeah. So now we're talking about normal children.
Yep.
We're
Yep.
not talking about children in a PQ. We're talking about in a doctor's office, routine checkup. And so I think we can see the beginning of the end, that she is starting to devolve, that her organization, her planning, her methodology, methodology that she had in that fixed hospital unit is gone now, and she's in a pediatric office, and she injects this little girl multiple times and causes respiratory arrest. Now, she heroically responded, but the child died en route to the hospital. And an autopsy later confirmed that there was a drug in her system that should never have been present. And this is really going to be the murder that brings down this serial killer.
Well, you talked about her devolving, right? So this is August to September 1982. Following Chelsea's murder, she just becomes more impulsive, like you mentioned,
Yep.
like becoming more disorganized, and more really deliberate in her attacks. She is suspected of killing a 7-year-old Jimmy Pearson and poisoning a 4-month-old Christopher Parker on the same day by
Yep.
injecting with I can always pronounce this. Cicasaline. How do you,
Cicaniclorine.
yeah.
That's the muscle relaxant. I
Yes,
do know
muscle
that,
relaxant.
Brandy.
Yes. So both children are rushed to the hospital, where Jimmy Pearson later dies from complications.
Yep.
But then she injects a 5-month-old Rolinda Ruff, but medical personnel at the hospital, aware of the issues from Dr. Holland's practice, stabilize the girl, identify the poisoning, and then notify the facility's board. I mean,
yeah, Genene is definitely devolving. She kills Chelsea, poisons the Parker, kills Pearson, and then attacks this 5-month-old. But fortunately, we have doctors again that are stepping in. These doctors have noticed in August and September alone, 1, 2, 3, 4 different instances where children from the one doctor's office are being rushed to the hospital for medical emergencies, and they go, no, we have got to do autopsies. We've got to look into this. And and they actually identified the poison too. And then that started a much larger investigation, because now you're out of the hospital system, right?
Right, yeah.
You have doctors saying, we think these kids were poisoned. We're notifying law enforcement. This is no longer an internal investigation.
Nope. Doctors come in. They want to start an investigation of the deaths, like you mentioned, which led them to Jones. Now, at the time, Dr. Holland's suspicions start to grow after discovering some of those open bottles of the muscle relaxant that she was injecting. Now, she comes to work, and here we go with the narcissistic and, Munchausen on of herself. She shows up to work and tells the Dr. Holland that she has taken an overdose of antidepressant drugs, and she is then transported to the hospital where her stomach is pumped. So again, looking for that attention, John.
Reverted almost back to the teenage years, right?
Yep.
Where it was Munchausen, and then her Munchausen by proxy ended in murder.
Yep.
And paralysis and long-term illnesses of all of these children. Now she's totally devolving, overdoses, But does she really want to kill herself, Brandy? No, she drives herself to work, overdosed on antidepressants, drives herself to work and says, "Oh, poor me, I overdosed." And then the doctor takes care of her.
Yeah, shows up to let them know. Very strange. She's fired 4 days later. Dr. Holland
Yep.
fires her. The day after that, Holland and Jones are actually taken to Austin for polygraph tests. So now they're going to start asking him some questions about what's going on in that doctor's office.
Yep, exactly. And detectives are now investigating this and compiling information for a grand jury that's seated in San Antonio, accusing her of wrongdoing. And it doesn't take too long to figure this out. As a matter of fact, she was arrested in November of 82, just a couple months later, but released on bond. So she's out on bond, but fortunately, she's not working.
No, thankfully. But she's arrested again, John. It comes May 24th, 1983. She's
the investigation's continuing.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So they got her on some charges, indicted her, but that didn't stop the investigation. We have a string of dead babies going back a couple years. So this turns into a massive investigation.
In that 83 arrest, that's when she's charged with the murder of Chelsea McKellen. She's found guilty in February of 84 and in May sentenced to 99 years in prison with triple credit for served time due to the 1977 prison overcrowding bill signed by Governor Ann Richards. So found guilty, sentenced to 99 years, and triple credit time served.
And triple credit
very
means
interesting.
3 days for every day served.
Yeah.
So basically, if she's sentenced to 99, she automatically will only serve 33, even though she was convicted of murder. And there may even be other good time behavior and other things put on top of that. And we did see during this time, because of this just really poor prison crowding legislation in Texas, I personally saw murderers that did almost zero time in the Texas Department of Corrections. They spent so much time in the county jail, and TDC was overcrowded. I know guys that served their whole sentence without ever stepping into a state prison. Absolutely a ridiculous time there. But it was discovered in 2017 that there was this snafu, right?
Right.
And that Jones was about to be released in 2018. That's how quickly she qualified for time under this prison overcrowding. So thankfully, a district attorney, Nico LaHood, created a task force and said, we've got to look into all of these cold cases. Where else did we see this? Remember we saw in the Carl Watts case?
Yes.
He was going to be released in Houston because of a snafu in Texas law, and the Michigan prosecutor stepped up, made a plea to the citizens and said, call us with any information. This serial killer is about to be released.
Oh, I remember that.
People came forward, got information, got indictments, and arrested and incarcerated him. And we're going to see this in this case too, that the investigation was reopened. They started looking into all of the babies that died during the 1980s in the Bexar County Hospital, and specifically 5 murders that included on her watch. And they brought it to Jones and said, we've got you, again and again and again. And initially she pled not guilty, but then accepted a plea deal in the Rolando Santos, you remember him, his case, and for attempted murder, right? Not murder, but she accepted a plea deal for murder and thankfully got an additional 60-year sentence.
Well, she starts to confess to some of this. In 1998, the parole hearing, Jones finally admits to injecting babies and admits her guilt in the McKellen murder. In 2011, she confesses to killing an unspecified number of babies, John, saying she was not of sound mind anytime before 1994 when she found God.
Yep. Now she's using, I'm crazy. I'm mentally ill. I didn't know what I was doing. But again, you go back and look at the circumstances of each of the crimes. She intentionally tried covering it up. She intentionally tried getting away with it. She doesn't have an insanity defense here.
That's right.
And in 2020, she also pled guilty to the murder of Joshua Sawyer and was again sentenced to life imprisonment. And I like during that trial what the judge said. He said, quote, "You took God's most precious gift, babies." And he was determined to make sure she was never going to get out. And he said, "I don't even think that me passing this judgment on you is enough. You are going to really find out in your next life." So I think that judge really, this is an absolutely ludicrous case of murder.
Well, and like you said in the beginning, this is very unique and unusual. You have a narcissistic serial killer who is killing the most vulnerable. Um, growing up, convincing people she's sick and there's something wrong with her. Again, dealing with this mental illness. Then you have missed opportunities, John. How many times did we talk about this? Missed opportunities of catching this woman, and holding her accountable. And, did any of Dr. Holland's children need to die at that point? No.
Exactly.
I mean, she could have been stopped.
After the first investigation, did other Bear County children need to die? Yeah. Here we have a female, which is rare for serial killers, a healthcare worker, which is rare, but a female healthcare worker that had no remorse, no empathy, and was so narcissistic. She thought she was God and she could play God over the life and death of innocent babies. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all of our listeners you can follow us on all of our socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at JJ True Crime and Wine. And you can join us each and every episode as Brandy and I profiled these unique and interesting serial killers from around the world. Now, of course, I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond. Great job today, as usual, Brandy, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, who makes this show possible. And I invite you to join us for the next episode of a unique serial killer that targeted trains. He caused train wrecks to not only kill as many people as possible, but to hear their screams. I'm John Matthews. Thanks for joining us today for True Crime and Wine. Salute.